came out of the civil rights movement, even going back to the Civil War, there was a sense of a lot of people who were not people of color, that there had been institutionalized race, and they wanted to be at the forefront, and they were. And during 60 years, 70 years ago, when we had the civil rights movement, and they supported affirmative action for African Americans. But what happened was, then people didn't become introspective and empirical, so we kept adding to the number of victims. So we coined a new word, diversity, and we didn't even think about it, but it didn't mean anymore that you had grievances against the past for racial bias. You could get off a boat from Argentina and be blue-eyed but have a Spanish name and be in diversity. You could come from India, you could come from Egypt. And the number of victims then became 30% of, and if you add women to half the population, you can have 200 million people who had claims. So this white group, and that's even a problematic term because everybody's families intermarried now. This group then suddenly said, well, we had the civil rights movement, we had affirmative action, and why am I guilty, or what did I do wrong that somebody from India or somebody from Palestine just comes here or crosses the border one day and all of a sudden has a whole list of grievances that require government remuneration or reparation? And so that group is starting to erode. It's a pretty recent phenomenon. And I think what's happened to the Democratic Party is they're in shock because they said, well, we just took that group because they were the old Union households, and now we're losing them. But then when they started losing them, they said, it doesn't really matter because we've had 16 million people come in illegally. We have groups that are non-white, and we're going to make them identify by their superficial appearance. It's not going to be incidental to the old melting pot. It's going to be essential under the new salad bowl. So they felt, if we can't win these deplorables back, then we'll bring in other voters and we will have a big state entitlement system, and they will show their fealty generation after toward us. The problem with that is people do assimilate. And after the second or third generation, it's not just Pelosi and Giuliani. You can't tell who they're going to vote for by their ethnic last name. That's one thing. And the second thing is, if they start to do that, they only create a greater pushback by the people they're demonizing. So now we have this word white that I don't remember really ever thinking of. But when you say white privilege, white privilege, white privilege, white privilege, you, safe space, trigger warning, sanctuary, data, people say everybody is tribalizing, and I don't want to tribalize, but if they're going to keep telling me I'm part of a tribal, then I'm going to be tribal, and then they're going to start voting, and that group, as you say, is still the majority. So the left is in a conundrum, and they don't know quite, they anticipated their demography by about 50 years. Got ahead of it. And even if they had the demography they want right now, they're not quite sure how to make people vote monolithically according to their skin color rather than their content of their character. So I think they're in a dilemma. And meanwhile, Donald Trump, being crafty, is going around the back and saying, you in Detroit and you in Newark and you guys in Bakersfield and San Jose, I'm going to get you better jobs in a way that they never did. So you don't have to tell anybody you're voting for me, just go in there and vote. And they're so leveraged into having a 90% African American voter, 75, they can't afford any hemorrhaging because they've lost the white working class. That's their dilemma, and it explains a lot of the invective and rhetoric and anger, I think.